Shalom from Jerusalem. This is another edition of TV7's Middle East Review. With me, as usual, my colleague and friend, Colonel Reserve Dr. Eran Lerman. Good morning to you. And we are here in the midst of a war that started on the 7th of October with a brutal, savage attack by Hamas, ISIS-like, worse than the Nazis in the sense that they were maiming, brutalizing bodies and all the horrific, worst scenes from hell came out of Hamas, which means that Hamas has to be eradicated. To render it no relevant yet for military purposes, political purposes, ideology is something else, which we may touch later. But first and foremost, Iran, we are here a few weeks into the war. Right now, there is a lull in the war. There is some kind of a ceasefire. Or pause, as they call it.
We have to be very careful with our language.
Yes. And how do you read the situation now?
We are coming up to a decisive junction. I believe that the present package that enabled the pause, namely the release of 10 children, women, and some foreign workers every day by Hamas, in return for a 3-to-1 ratio of releases from minors in jail for crimes, and women arrested also for terrorist crimes over the years. That package has worked remarkably in terms of the sense of the Israeli people of seeing night after night children, sometimes toddlers and elderly women coming home. There is an immense emotional involvement, immense emotional relief, but this is drawing to a close. And the bigger question will be whether Hamas would be willing to continue to release roughly on that basis, in which case the pause could be prolonged, or they will pose demands that Israel cannot accept. Wholesale release of thousands of murderers, etc., and an end to the fighting, a ceasefire, a real ceasefire, not a pause in the fighting.
Maybe even armistice or a hudna, as they call it.
Which is unacceptable not only to the Israeli political echelon. And by the way, I hear that there was not a single dissenting voice on this question in the broader cabinet, this huge bloated cabinet that we now have that was bloated before the war, became even larger when...
That's important, Iran. Let me just
emphasize... National Coalition was created.
Yes, just to emphasize to our
not
viewers.
Not a single...
Even the doves, those soft-spoken and those who are leaning, let's say, to the most, lenient or liberal ideology, who came from labor or from the left, who are part of the government that came with Gantz, even they are not willing for anything but the demise of Hamas.
And you hear this also from people on the hard left who are still outside the traditional Zionist left, who believe in peace with all their heart. And they also realize that without the destruction of Hamas, and down the road, by the way, the removal of the dark cloud of Iranian-supported radicalism that threatens us as well as the rest of the region, without this being dealt with, there's no prospect of ever having a stable relationship with our Palestinian neighbors. So the pause was vital for the release of the hostages. It comes with a certain military cost, because Hamas had time to regroup, to figure out what is the military situation on the ground. We accepted a ban on direct overhead air surveillance over southern part of Gaza, and a limited ban for some hours in the north. This would probably be translated into improved Hamas positioning when the fighting resumes. But the IDF was willing to take these risks based on what we learned in the weeks of the ground incursion, that they are capable of dealing with this threat quite effectively, far more effectively than most people expected. Every loss is a terrible loss, and the Israelis mourn every soldier killed in battle. I was once asked by American friends, how can we function during the Second Lebanon War? How can we function when every morning the newspapers, front page pictures of the fallen and their grieving families, and how can we continue to fight? But that's actually part of our strength, that every soldier knows that he would not be just a statistic if God forbid, he falls in battle. And all these losses, at the end of the day, I'm saying this from the point of view of military analysis, the expectation of a defender against attacker is a kind of 3-to-1 ratio in losses. In fact, it was 1-to-50 or more
against the defender.
Against the defender, against Hamas. And so clearly the IDF is capable of dealing with this challenge. And you hear from all soldiers who are down there inside Gaza or on the Gaza perimeter that they are simply eager to see this through. Despite the risks, despite the privations, they are determined to see this through to the elimination of Hamas as a military force and as a governance in Gaza. The ideology will take time. We are going to need a long transition period with effective de-Hamasization, the sort of thing we've seen in Germany after 1945.
Or in Japan even, Imperial Japan, yeah. But I would say that from a military point of view, Hamas, ISIS, they were strong and brave, courageous against toddlers and children and elderly. They, in the first day where the IDF was nowhere to be seen, unfortunately, they were bragging. But when they met a real military force, they were actually either running away or just being eliminated. And in that sense, I believe that gives, us hope that it is achievable to the goal that was set to eliminate Hamas, certainly as a military force, is achievable. But Eran, I want to go maybe into a larger picture. Hamas so far has missed on all its analysis and its objectives. Hamas thought that maybe it can start a regional war, that other nefarious forces, proxies of Iran will join, whether it's Hezbollah in the north, whether it's the Houthis, which are doing some things, but, not very effective. The Iranian militias in Syria and in Iraq will act up. The Hamas and in Judea and Samaria will act up. The Israeli Arabs will act up. He had a vision of a total war where Israel is besieged. That was wrong.
Yes,
He's
the five front or seven front
right. The second
imagery has not panned out.
The second thinking was that Israel is so weak and divided that it will collapse within itself, that actually the division in Israel will continue with the blame against the government for the failure in the defense of our southern front, and that also will add to their victory. And the third one was that the international community will stop us short, which they did not yet. However, now we are coming towards, let's say, the later phases of the war. Hamas certainly is against the wall. And still, it seems like, if you look at Sinwar, the head of Hamas, the one who's calling the shots, together with Mohammed Def, which is his military commander, they still believe, or at least according to their strategy or their tactics, is that they have a way out, either by toying with us, with the release, dragging on the release of prisoners, or with the hope that they think that the international community will stop us against a ground operation in the southern part of Gaza, Khan Yunis namely, where I guess the headquarters of Hamas is. Do you think it is valid for him to think that there would be a different end of the game than we, and may I add also most of the Sunni Arab regimes in the United States are hoping for?
Well, clearly they are counting on this possibility. It was put on the table in the four-way intelligence chiefs gathering or discussion. It's not exactly a negotiation.
You're talking about
in Qatar. That
Bill
is
Burns
to
of the
say,
CIA.
Bill Burns of the CIA, Daddy Barnea from Israel,
Kamal
Abbas Kamel from the Egyptian intelligence
Mukhabarat,
service.
yeah.
Yes, the head of
Mukhabarat.
Mukhabarat, and the Qatari prime minister, who doubles also as the head of their services. And the Qataris are certainly the agents of a Hamas bid to bring the war to an end. And now we need the Qataris because they facilitate the release of the hostages. But let's say that the larger questions hanging over the Qatari role will not go away as yet. And they're now revealed to have also played a major role in corrupting and subverting the intellectual integrity of American academic institutions. The Qataris will have to account for many things. But I don't believe at the end of the day that the Egyptians want to continue to live next to a Hamas-controlled enclave. And I ultimately think that the American administration understood the need to dismantle Hamas. We may have differences as to how to go about it. They urge for them to carry the pause a bit further, get more hostages released, if possible, more of the few Americans who are still in captivity released, is understandable. But I listened very carefully to President Biden when he spoke in Nantucket about the release of the Israeli toddler,
Abigail
Edan, and
who is American citizenship.
Was an American
also.
citizen. And the way he spoke about it, two things stood out. First of all, he speaks about the pause. He doesn't speak about the ceasefire. And he's very careful with his language. He also described the horrific circumstances of her abduction and the murder of her parents. And anyone who refers to this in stark contrast to the Prime Minister of Ireland, who spoke about a girl who was lost and found. I mean, this may be from Lucas, but it's not.
I thought it was maybe from the fables of the Grimm brothers.
No, some people have picked it up that it refers to a Christian trope that refers to Christ himself. But he had this been the case, he should have said, "Well, I will quote to you from the Bible, but let us remember that this was a crime committed against a child." And Biden was very clear about the enormity of what is at stake. So for him, the understanding that Hamas must be undone for the region to have any future is acute. And in fact, he ties this up also for political reasons, because he tries to push a supplemental for both Israel and Ukraine. He ties this with the Russian aggression in Ukraine, attacks on democracies with the intent of destroying thriving democracies. And therefore, I believe that he understands the need for this war to pursue to the end. Meanwhile, we have the Iranian issue becoming increasingly challenging to those in the West, both the E3, Britain, Germany, and France, and in Washington, who are hoping somehow to bring the nuclear file to an understanding or an agreement, and who are still trying to separate this war and its implications in the region from the Iranian intentions of destabilizing the region and the world. And this is increasingly becoming, this attempt to departmentalize is increasingly untenable.
So Iran, by fueling this war, by actually encouraging their proxies, not themselves, we said here
they keep safe.
That they keep safe for themselves, but they will fight until the last Palestinian, the last Yemenite, the last Lebanese, and so on and so forth. But by keep fueling that or leading from behind in this war efforts now against Israel and the West, I would say, but at the same time, they are still using this as a diversion, as the entire international focus right now is on the war in Gaza. But meanwhile, in their installations, nuclear installations, whether it's in Natanz or Purdue or anywhere else, they continue unrelentlessly toward getting a nuclear capabilities. And at the same time, there is no real control, since they have also managed to dictate to the IAEA who would be the inspectors.
Right.
And they insist that the inspectors will be from Russia or from China, and we know this is a joke. So how do you see this developing? Are we just losing the war on the Iranian nuclear capability?
Well, I believe that at the end of the day, despite the war effort, the Israeli intelligence community and the Israeli decision makers are keeping a beady eye on what's happening in Iran. What we heard during the Board of Governors discussions of the IAEA from Grossi and so on, in terms of the report on what's happening in Iran is very worrying across the full range of activities, from enrichment to just close to military grade, and all the way down to further production of uranium ore, and the possibility of further plutogenic facilities being built. If there's a question on anyone's mind that this is a military effort, these activities have no justified, certainly not enrichment to 60% and beyond, no justified civilian use whatsoever. So we may be in the midst of this immense challenge that we're facing in the South, also at the point of decision. Maybe not in days and weeks, but not far beyond that, as to what needs to be done. And what also has to happen is for the international community to wake up to the full enormity of the Iranian challenge. The Saudis are playing now both sides of the game. They are speaking to the Iranians. They're trying to see if they can come to a regional understanding with the Iranians, with a wink and a nod to the Chinese, who engineered the original breakthrough between the two countries. But at the same time, they continue to rely on American leadership and expect it. And the Americans are increasingly engaged with Iranian proxies on two fronts already, in terms of shots fired in anger. And in the Persian Gulf, with the IRGC naval forces, they're playing a cat and mouse game.
Persian Gulf, maybe we should call it the Arabian Gulf.
The Gulf. It's the Gulf, the one, the oil Gulf. Let's call it the oil Gulf. They're playing cat and mouse games with around the carrier strike force of the Eisenhower. But two things that have already been happening. First of all, there have been about 70 attacks by Iranian proxies and IRGC-related against American targets in Syria and in Iraq. And already 4 times, I think, by my count, according to Central Command formal announcements, the U.S. Air Force struck back some of these attacks against well-defined Iranian-supported militias, like the Nujaba in Iraq. Also, the Americans have been involved in intercepting and preventing Houthi missile and drone attacks aimed at Israel. In fact, even the Saudis have been of minor help in this respect. And also the American Navy interfered to release a carrier, a tanker, that was captured. I think later turned out that these may have been Somali pirates rather than Houthi pirates, but originally the impression was that this was a Houthi operation, and the Houthis certainly fired a rocket in the general direction of the American rescue force. So there is increasingly friction, although let's say controlled, low to mid-intensity friction with Iranian proxies. We have the same situation up north. Hezbollah has respected Israeli-Hamas pause. They also paused. But prior to that, they were driving up the level of confrontation way below their full capacity. And they are halfway in, or 1/3 of the way in terms of what they are capable of doing. But they are involved in firing at Israeli civilian areas, which has led to the evacuation of a very large number of Israeli citizens.
Dozens
from the
of
north.
thousands.
Yes.
Yeah, Iran, we'll touch the Hezbollah in the north in a little bit later, but let's just finish to unpack the Iranian threat. So we know there are now three components. The one, the war in Gaza, and Hezbollah is part of it, let's say. The nuclear file, which they are continuing to drive at, and piracy and threatening the waterways of the Gulf. And in that case, and of course, attacking the American forces. It seems to me that we should call into question the American response, which may be a little bit too soft. I know that President Biden's major goal, or one of the objectives, is not to widen the war into a regional and even beyond, which is understandable. But if there is no deterrence, there is no response, then we might lose the war on the nuclear issue, especially as the United States have two great tools. One is a political tool, which is the snapback on the sanctions. I think this is something that the Ayatollahs in Iran fear the most, because snapback sanctions can really bring back their economy to a verge of collapse. And of course, a stronger military response in the Gulf. Why is the Americans are so hesitant at this point?
Well, I think some people have not yet crossed the river, the Rubicon, in terms of the previous paradigm, which was that, well, the Israelis may make noises, but we are moving back to some version of the JCPOA, the understandings.
From 2015.
From 2015. Not a signed agreement, as we all know, because that would have required ratification when there was no chance the Senate would ratify this. But back to some kind of agreement. But by now, Iran has placed itself very firmly in the Chinese-Russian Iranian triangle. You can throw in North Korea, maybe even Venezuela, which just invaded Guyana.
Next will be South Africa.
Who knows? The bloc of forces that are basically seeking to undermine American leadership, democracy, the world order, the liberal world order that we thought that had triumphed in the 1990s.
After the collapse of the
Soviet Union, is now being challenged by a loose coalition of hostile forces.
But very determined, unfortunately.
And we need to speak to the Iranians, to the Americans, about the role of the Iranians in all of this. This is no longer impossible to hold on to the previous paradigm.
And it's quite obvious that Iran is not just a regional threat now, it's a global threat. And
In its own way.
And
I think there are many in Washington who understand this, certainly in Congress, but also
in the Pentagon, I would say, and
I would expect
in the
also
brass,
within
in
the
the military
administration,
high brass, absolutely. Well, we didn't touch too much about Hezbollah. We don't have much time left, but one thing is certain, given the experience, the horrific experience of the 7th of October, that Israel cannot live with the Hezbollah right smack dab against its fence on the northern border.
Yes.
And
special forces must be removed north of the Litani, whether through international application of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 from 2006, or by force.
And here, I think we should take note of the fact that the Israeli government is preparing the case.
Indeed.
The case for if needed, some operation by force, or as we say, casus belli, a cause for war. And the cause for war here, of course, is the Lebanese actually infringing and breaking the commitment of Security Council Resolution 1701, which ended the Second Lebanon War in 2006, by which, according to the Security Council resolution, Hezbollah force should be actually north of the Litani. There is another clause there that nobody talks about, which is actually the disarming all militias, unauthorized militias in Lebanon, which includes the Hezbollah, but this may be a pipe dream. But certainly we need to do something with the Litani.
This war is far from over.
Yeah, we are not even at the end of the beginning, probably, but certainly we are determined to win, to protect our way of lives, to protect our values and heritage and legacy, and we'll do it with all our friends around the world. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next month.